to kind of mitigate that reaction, because it's not a response, it's reaction.
And, we as human beings are all faced with that paradoxical experience of having been acculturated into a culture. And how does a culture help us define ourselves? By creating boundaries. This is good, this is bad, this is right, this is wrong, in order for that culture to continue. I mean, if we look at the primary directive of cultures, is they continue themselves by any means necessary. And sometimes that can look pretty ugly. And sometimes it looks beautiful. So we're caught in this really interesting conundrum of having a clear, deep, emotional, intellectual sense of ourselves. And a big part of that self has to do with our belief system. So back in the day, Descartes said, "I think, therefore I am." I think we could translate that into the modern world as, "I believe, therefore I am." My belief system gives me identity. I know who I am. So if my belief system has certain boundaries and yours has different boundaries, I am going to do reaction rather than respond. I can't respond because there's a threat to who I believe myself to be.
People seem to be very convinced that this is what's happening in the U.S. with the deepening of polarization. There's this sense that, for example, in the political realm, that the ability to reach consensus was that America is losing it. That ability.
One of the things that's occurred to me, because I've been very involved in the political scene since the 60s, and I've watched the evolution of politics from then, is that very thing, the evolution. There's a process that's going on, whether you like it or not, however you frame it. There is this process that's going on, and it's moving in a direction. We could say it's a bad direction or a good direction, but the fact of the matter is it's moving along. A lot of the change has to do not so much with the politics itself, but the influences, particularly the rate and intensity and change of technology and the intensity and change of the relationship of everyone in the world together. We mentioned earlier about COVID. COVID is the first real globalization. I mean, the economist people talk about it, but I mean, COVID has done it. Here we all are in that. And that's the beginning. I mean, underneath that is whatever is happening with the degradation of the planet. And that's something we're all in together too. And what seems to be happening as we evolve is that becomes much more clear. How that relates to the fragmentation politically is real interesting. It's like that's really a big and a very deep question that I don't hear a whole lot of people talking about yet. But I think that's a primary issue for us to look at.
Perhaps the acceleration of technology and information and all the stimulation and the uncertainty that it's producing for a lot of people could be one influence. That as I feel less stable, I feel a greater need to find some stabilizing influence.
Absolutely.
And whether or not I would have even particularly cared about electoral politics 10 or 20 or 30 years ago or whatever, at this just as an example, because I have been at this point in my life, it's like, okay, well, if I have the impression that the ground is giving way beneath me, I need something that's solid. I need definition.
Yeah.
I need stability. And I would just say that, in my opinion, this is one of the It's one of the oldest ones in the book. You know, I mean, there are passages in the Bible that say, you know, looking back and talking about the good old days is just a trap. It's just a waste of time because people in the good old days were doing the same thing. But it's in so many ways, it's kind of a natural human reaction. You know?
This gets into a real interesting conversation about basic worldviews. If you look at materialism, another word for it, synonym is stability. You know, there's the material world. We can count on this. You know. And that's a worldview that Western civilization has built itself upon. The what I would consider the balancing aspect of civilization would be the non-material, or we could call it the subtle, or it's manifest as religion in most cultures, but it has to do with the intuitive sense of being in the world. So we have this solid sense, and then there's this other intuitive sense. And if we look at what's happened in the West, the materialistic phenomena, with science being a very powerful tool that's come out of it, really taking off and becoming a really important aspect. You look at, say, another culture. I'm more familiar with Buddhist culture, so I can speak from that place. The primary directive of Buddhism is that everything is shifting and changing. The whole universe is in a flow, and there is nothing that isn't part of this shifting and changing. There is nothing to hold on to, which for most people is just a freak out, and particularly if you come from a Western place. What's happened, say, in Thai culture, which is very interesting, is if you look at the general population, they tend to be malleable. You know, the history has shown this in terms of being dominated by the Japanese in the Second World War. I mean, we could look at a historical way of how that basic idea of change being the basics rather than material, and just how that manifests. And we're being challenged with change. The material culture is having to deal with not knowing what's going on.
A bit of the strife, perceived strife in Western culture, from my perspective, as a Christian theology, you would say that Christianity embraces an apocalyptic worldview, that history is moving to a point, and something apocalyptic will happen, you know, and it's got to, and it's going to, and things are going to change.
Yeah.
You know, we can clearly also see in the U.S. and in many other Western countries, you know, there's also this constant kind of back and forth.
Right.
But in every situation, there always is a line drawn.
Sure.
It's perceived as, you know, science versus religion, or you know, or something like that. So even the religious tradition participates in this sort of dualistic either or. It's not really a yes and.
You know, that's the duality system that creates the split. It's either yes or no, and they are in conflict with each other. I think the politics is a perfect example of how that's manifest on a social level. And I see it at least partially as this incredible overstimulation where people have had to rigidify around one place or the other. When in fact, you know, if you look at the two positions, one is stability, the other is freedom. I mean, this is one of the ways of looking at it. Both of those are part of both the personal organism, but also the collective organism. And we've set ourselves up, positioning ourselves against one side versus the other side, when in fact underneath it we carry both sides. And this is, we could talk about the holistic perspective, and that's what we can gain from more holistic philosophies or more holistic cultures, that we are saying yes and rather than yes but. So we're acknowledging what is, and that acknowledgement then gives us a neutral place to start moving from. If we're not acknowledging the whole playing field, we're saying my side is good and your side is bad, then we have nothing left but struggle and strife and eventually some kind of consensus. But there isn't a real giving into the consensus. There's always a sense of partiality on both sides. Well, we got most of it, but we didn't get this, so next time we'll get this. Right, and the difficulty is that the level and intensity of stimulation has essentially created people who are in that flight-fight mode as far as an identity goes, and there's a feeling or a need to hold on to something, to anything, because they'll become subsumed into chaos.
Okay, so after you've watched all of our videos on our channel, turn your computer off and go outside and take a walk. Maybe with a friend. Talk to them face to face instead of texting or calling or Zooming them. And refamiliarize yourself with the physical reality that you inhabit.
So here we have four very clear ways of manifesting ourselves, both individually but also collectively. So we come together in terms of this present-centeredness. We're talking about wholeness. We're talking about completeness. I'm not going to need to have a bad guy there because I'm afraid of those particular aspects of myself, because I recognize as a human being, I have it all, and everybody has it all. So if you're in the world and you're giving yourself the delusion that somehow those are bad people and I'm good people, you're living a dream. Sorry. And we all do that to a degree, but sorry. In the world as it is, there are going to be situations where I am not going to need to create boundaries. Okay, and that's what happens, but I do it not out of reaction. Oh, those people over there are bad people, we got to get rid of those. But I do it out of response because, oh, that guy has a club over there and he's coming this way. Good idea, I get the hell out of here. I'm using the here and now as my reality, because it seems to be the reality. Here and now seems to be the basic thing that's going on. To it's almost like we're asleep, and the culture as a cradle kind of cradles us to continue that sleep because we're able to function throughout the culture. But now the culture has ramped itself up to such a degree that it's starting to shake the crib a little bit, and people are going into these reactive places. My hope and my sincere desire is that the reaction will wake people up so that they will stop and start noticing our oneness, our specieshood, which is a palpable experiential reality that underlies all the cultural. The cultural is secondary phenomena, all of it. And that's a hard one. And most of us are addicted to that rigidified sensory reality, that rigidified cultural reality.
At this point, I would like to reiterate that we can stop, look, listen, and reflect.
Right on.